This railway adventure is like a ride on a time machine. Medieval villages, a town of the Industrial Revolution, and a living 19th century community, all on the Severn Valley Railway. Hi, I'm Bernie Coppell. Just up the tracks, the world's first cast iron bridge, and a town that's living in the past. Travel from Saxon times to the computer age on railway adventures across Europe. Out with the old and in with the new doesn't apply everywhere, and certainly not in England. We'll soon be riding rails where the ancient and the high-tech function side by side. Our railway adventure takes us from Kidderminster in the heart of England's South Midlands to the town of Bridgnorth. Throughout our rail travels, we'll see incredible contrast between ancient and modern times. We'll cross the world's first cast iron bridge, discover how ancient weaving processes are impacted by the computer age, visit a medieval watermill that's been grinding for centuries, see the ruins of a 12th century fortress, and ride Britain's only inland cliff railway. The great Marquess steam locomotive powers our train on the Severn Valley Railway, and we'll ride North's inland cliff railway to the High Town area. Aboard for adventures across
the very heart of the town, water and rail transportation meet. The industrial Kidderminster, whose origins can be traced back to Saxon times in the 12th century, is the starting point of the 16-mile-long Severn Valley Railway. Kidderminster, where our adventure begins, is 125 miles from London and only 17 miles from Birmingham, where British Rail provides convenient regular service to the town. Before the railways carved their iron paths through the area, an extensive network of canals had already been established. Today, pleasure craft ply the murky waters of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. Horse-drawn longboats once carried wool to the large carpet mills and shipped finished goods throughout the land. The very center of Kidderminster is dominated by the Victorian grandeur of Britain's carpet mills. What began as a cottage industry in the middle of the 18th century soon came under the control of local master craftsmen. By the early 19th century, carpet production had moved into huge factories we've come to associate with the Industrial Revolution. The introduction of steam power meant the construction of larger and faster looms. For a generation, Kidderminster was the largest carpet-making town in the entire world. In the year 1872, the now famous Axminster carpets began production. The variety of multicolored floral and Persian designs now possible saw production rise to almost 1 million square yards per year. The mills cover every production process, including dyeing their own yarn. But the industry can't afford to stand still, and one of the biggest areas of change has been in the design of carpets. Originally, a carpet designer would sit down with an idea, maybe a sketch or painting, and sometimes spend months on converting the design into a punched card format that the machines could mechanically transfer into the finished item. The carpet industry has been brought into the computer age with the introduction of high technology, computer-aided design systems. Right next door to one of the carpet mills is the new Kidderminster Station. This is the southern terminal of the Severn Valley Railway and the starting point of our adventure to Bridgenorth. The railway station houses the King and Castle Pub, a gift shop, and a snack bar. The station facilities are constantly improving as new track is being laid into a second platform. During the summer season, the railway operates 3 steam engines, which are interchanged during each trip. Today, we'll begin with engine number 3442, named the Great Marquess. The locomotive is originally from the London and North Eastern Railway. A new Great Western-style signal box or control room has been built at Kidderminster to control train movements in the station area. The Great Marquess runs around the train to get ready for departure. We'll go back in time 500 years in just a minute. The Great Marquess was built in July 1938 and spent its life with British Rail, working the West Highland Line from Glasgow to Fort William and MAINLINE before being withdrawn from service December 30th, 1961. 2 years later, the locomotive was bought from British Rail by Severn Valley Railway's president, Lord Lindsay, and sent to Cowlairs Works in Glasgow for repair and restoration. From Kidderminster, the Severn Valley Railway follows the British Rail main line for a short distance before heading southwest through the outskirts of town and on through Foley Park before passing through Bewdley Tunnel. North of the line at this point lies the West Midlands Safari Park, where passengers may catch a glimpse of the many animals living here at the 200-acre site. Our first railway station stop is in Bewdley. Because there is no turntable here, it's run backwards. Great Marquess is uncoupled for its return to Kidderminster, where it will pull the second train of the day. We'll tour Bewdley and board the second train later. The locomotive which will take this train to Bridgenorth is known as a 260 tender locomotive. The 260 is a reference to the number of wheels in each of the 2 or 3 sets on an engine. This was the second steam engine the Severn Valley Railway acquired when it began preserving and restoring the route. It arrived at Bridgenorth on April 22, 1967. The locomotive gracefully departs from Bewdley on its way to Bridgenorth. Bewdley stands at the very edge of the wire forest. Records show that the town developed as a market center in 1376, and during the next century developed more as a river port. The first bridge was built in 1447 and provided income from tolls. By the time the canals and later the railway were constructed, the town had already established itself as a trade center. The foundation of local trades like rope making, basket weaving, charcoal burning, and brassworks can still be found in the Working Museum on Lode Street. The Bewdley Museum commemorates the traditional crafts of the area. The original Lode Street Market, now rebuilt, is also preserved here. In the 1830s, there were 5 rope factories in town, but by 1900, only 1 rope yard remained. This remained open until March 1972, when falling demand finally forced the ancient craft out of business. Visitors to the museum can see for themselves the diversity of crafts, from from rope making to clay pipe making. It's time to board our train, continuing the adventure to the next station, Arley. The Great Marquess, returning with a different set of coaches, pulls out of Bewdley Station. Just out of the station, we stride across the town at rooftop level on a high bridge. The line follows the river before sweeping around Trimpley Reservoir and Waterworks. We'll visit an area preserved as a living museum when we come back. We encounter a major engineering feat where the railway crosses the river by a single-span cast-iron bridge, the Victoria Bridge. When it was built in 1861, it had the largest cast-iron clear span in the world. The railway climbs through a deep man-made gorge to Arley Station, over 7 miles from Kidderminster. On the far hill opposite the station is the Norman Church in the upper Arley village. The journey at Arley is a must. The views from the station's picnic area across the valley to the beautiful village are amongst the most picturesque on the railway. Enjoyment of the river at this tranquil spot is just a leisurely walk down from the station. The main station building at Arley is of typical Severn Valley Railway style, in yellow brick, and dates from the opening of the line in 1862. On the platform, the station master changes the destination boards in preparation for the arrival of the next train bound for Bridgnorth. This train is headed by number 2857, a locomotive built in 1918 at Swindon Locomotive Works. For 60 years, these engines were responsible for hauling most of the long-distance heavy freight on Britain's Great Western Railway. Running even closer now to the river, the rails meander on its way to the highway. At the station, the signalman exchanges tokens with the incoming locomotive. The token has written instructions for the engineer regarding such things as train speed and track conditions ahead. Highley Village has at its center a church established in medieval times. The main community later grew up as a mining village in the 19th century. The arrival of number 46443, a tender locomotive, presents us with an opportunity to enter the cab of a working locomotive and watch, at close hand, driver and fireman at work. Looking ahead on our adventure, we travel to Iron Bridge Gorge. At the time of its construction, the railway continued north from Bridgnorth, following the river to this now world-famous heritage site. Cast and erected in 1779, this is the first cast iron bridge in the world. It's the focal point of the gorge and has been a center of attraction for over 200 years. Calling the Iron Bridge Gorge a museum is an understatement. It's actually a collection of historical sites, which can take 2 days to visit. At Bliss Hill Open Air Museum, visitors step back in time to a living community of the 1890s. The entire area is rich in the remains of Britain's early industry. From the mid-16th century, the gorge was an important coal mining area, and in 1709, Abraham Darby first smelted iron using coke instead of charcoal as his fuel, paving the way for rapid growth of the iron industry worldwide in the 1750s. At the ironworks, which are still operated in the traditional style, wrought iron is shaped by steam hammers and steam-powered rolling mills. During the late 19th century, small iron foundries could be found in almost every market town throughout Britain. A typical example of a small iron foundry can be seen working at the museum. Here at the Candle Factory, traditional methods of production are still in use. Now back on track and on to Hampton Load. Eleven and a half miles out of Kidderminster, the trains coast into Hampton Load Station. A short walk from the station is Chelmarsh Reservoir. This large expanse of water is put to good use by the local yacht club. Water transportation of a different kind can be found on the Hampton Load Ferry. Sisters Annie James and Keith Evans have been operating this ferry, which uses the natural power of the river's current pushing against a rudder for the past 30 years. The ferry is held by this steel cable and takes only a few minutes to cross the fast-flowing river. Stay tuned for a ride on Britain's only inland cliff railway. Having traveled from Highley to Hampton Load, there remains one last section to Bridgenorth before completing our journey along the Severn Valley. Once again, the Great Marquess is to provide the locomotive power for our train. We're headed for our final stop, Bridgenorth. The picnic area adjacent to the station provides an idyllic spot to watch the comings and goings. Climbing steadily on a gradient of 1%, our train approaches Ardington Summit. The summit passed, the train descends towards Bridgenorth, crossing the 5 arches of Oldbury Viaduct, a bridge that towers above Daniel's Mill. The Daniel's Corn Mill, at the foot of the Oldbury Viaduct, has a 38-foot high cast iron water wheel, which is the largest in England. The power of the water is transmitted by a series of cog wheels and gears to the large grinding stones. There's been a mill on this site since medieval times, and the present building has been in the same family for over 200 years. Bridgenorth Station, 16 miles from Kidderminster, is the end of the line for the Severn Valley Railway, but not for our adventure. The station occupies a large site quite close to the center of this interesting and historic town. History is vague as to the exact whereabouts of the original settlements in the Bridgenorth area. However, it's thought that the Saxons settled here around the year 912 AD. Bridgenorth has the only inland cliff railway in Britain. It was opened in 1891 and originally worked by water ballasting. The railway is now operated electrically and provides easy access to the Hightown area. The ruins of a castle tower, which stands at a perilous angle on Castle Rock, are all that remain of the impressive fortifications which were built in 1101. In the center of the town's main street, a mere 340 years old, is the town hall, still used by the town council today. Many fine old timbered buildings line the main street. Northgate, originally used as a prison, stands at one end of Tranquil Bridge North. Our adventure across the Severn Valley Railway has taken us through time to many historical places that are easily reached along the railway.
Perhaps timeless is the most appropriate English adjective to describe our travels from Kidderminster to Bridgenorth. We hope you've enjoyed riding a steam-powered time machine. I'm Bernie Coppell. Join me on the next Railway Adventures Across Europe. On this railway adventure, Switzerland's mighty and majestic Matterhorn, a peak that towers nearly 15,000 feet above sea level, on the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon Railway. Hi, I'm Bernie Coppell. Just up the tracks, a city without cars, and a train ride along sheer cliffs. Join me from Interlaken to the Matterhorn on Railway Adventures Across Europe. At a time when all the world seems to recognize the need to protect our environment, there's a lesson to be learned from a resort town at the base of one of the world's most famous peaks. We'll soon be there by rail. Our point of departure is Interlaken. We'll then ride to Zermatt and the Matterhorn. We'll be traveling through some of Switzerland's most magnificent scenery, including a 15th century castle, the bluest lake in the Eastern Hemisphere, and the Kander and Rhone rivers. We'll ride both the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon and the big Zermatt railways. We'll also have incredible mountaintop views during side trips on the Harder Kulm and Molena funicular railways. Stay with us for a fantastic railway adventure, one that takes us through Swiss valleys and high into a pristine mountain village. All aboard for MAINLINE to the Matterhorn.
One of the most spectacular railway adventures in Switzerland begins here in the Bernese Oberland, or High Alps of Bern. Bern is one of Switzerland's 26 states known as cantons. The Alps are in the southern part of Bern. Our starting point is between the waters of Lake Thun and Lake Brienz in the city of Interlaken. Interlaken is about 70 miles south of Zurich and is a major hub and starting point for our exploration of this region by rail. From Interlaken, it's south by rail to Zermatt and the Matterhorn. Interlaken's two train stations are on the east and west sides of the city. Because Interlaken sits between two lakes, there's a great opportunity for exploration of the region by boat as well as rail. The paddle steamer It's a perfect place to sit and watch the small towns and villages glide by. Motor launches also take visitors to many lakeside resorts. Interlaken is famous for its five-star hotels like the Jungfrau Victoria with its spectacular views, or the elegant Kursaal Casino. The horse-drawn taxis are famous and favorites of visitors. Not far from the Interlaken East Station, a little red funicular railway called the Harder Kulm takes passengers on a side trip. Funicular railways were specially designed to travel up mountains. The cars are pulled up and lowered by cables. It's a 4,500-foot climb up the slopes of the Harder Kulm, but the steep trip is a mere 12 minutes long. As the train reaches the summit station, a panorama of the Jungfrau or Virgin Peak region unfolds. From the restaurant patio, views of the lakes and the Bodeli, the flat land between them, can also be seen. At Interlaken's West Station, passengers wait for the train to Spitz. It's the first stop on our adventure south to Zermatt on the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon Railway, otherwise known as the BLS. The beginning of the trip takes us along the lake. Small train stations dot the banks of Lake Thun. BLS local trains stop at each station. But the high-speed intercity trains blow quickly by. Trains from the Swiss Federal Railways and from France, Germany, and Italy share the rails to the BLS. On this line, the changing scenery is briefly broken by an occasional tunnel. The town of Spitz and its medieval castle lie ahead when Railway Adventures continues. The main junction on the BLS is at Spitz, where the line from Interlaken to Thun meets the line to Brig. In Spitz, this castle dominates the bay. The tower dates back to the 11th century, while the castle itself was built in the 15th and 16th centuries. Today, it's a patrician house surrounded by vineyards and a boating harbor. The harbor is also a station for the ships of the BLS, all part of the same transportation system as the railway. But our adventure continues south through the Kandor Valley on one of the many international express trains. Outside the station, the train dives into the Hondrik Tunnel. A mile later, and the rails run beside the Kandor River. On this route, express trains stop at the larger stations, but the local trains stop at many more interesting places. The trip through the Kandor Valley begins at Mount Nissen. The town of MAINLINE sits at the base of this 7,750-foot mountain. From here, another funicular railway ascends to the top of the peak. The ride to the summit station takes about 30 minutes. From the top, the panoramic view stretches all the way to the northern canton of Jura and west to the Central Alps. Visitors view Switzerland's towns, villages, valleys, and forests from the sun terrace. Not far from the station, hiking trails spread out in all directions. Today, a Swiss rescue service is here to help an injured hiker. In the high Alps, helicopters are often used to carry patients to nearby hospitals. Back on the BLS train through the Kandor Valley, the lower slopes of the Nissen flash by. From the floor of the valley, the train begins climbing. Frutigen, the next stop, sits 2,500 feet above sea level. Since it's a control center for this part of the railway, Frutigen is a busy station. Express and local trains as well as trains from Italy and Germany pass through. It's also the end of the line for the local BLS trains. From here, it's express trains all the way. And a short line, the natural wonders of the Kandor Valley away, including the bluest lake in summer. Adventure continues. At Frutigen, we reboard our BLS train and continue our adventure. Traveling south from Frutigen in Switzerland's Kandor Valley stands an excellent example of Swiss railway engineering. It's an 11-arch stone bridge called the Kandor Viaduct. It spans the waters of the river Kandor. Continuing south, the train approaches the Alpine barrier known as the Lochberg. This sturdy and steep mountain range is penetrated by the Lochberg Tunnel further down the line. Before reaching it, the train climbs 1,275 feet over a brief 5 miles of rail between Frutigen and Kandersteg. Swiss engineers tackled this challenge by curving the line through 180 degrees, turning the trains northward, forcing them to retrace their tracks at a higher level. Once they reach the tunnel, another 180-degree turn brings them back on their southerly route. Before reaching Kandersteg and the Lochberg Tunnel, the train stops at the small Blautsee-Mietholz station. One of the Kander Valley's natural wonders is hidden here. It's the famous Blautsee, or Blue Lake. The lake was formed many centuries ago by a violent avalanche. The crystal clear blue color of the lake is said to come from minerals. As the melting snow trickles down to the Blautsee, it passes through underground minerals. The result, this brilliant blue water. The lake, the river, and the resorts in this area make it a favorite stopping point on the BLS. Nearby are trails for hiking and camping. But for those who want a more civilized dining experience, fresh trout is served at the nearby restaurant. The Alpine surroundings are quiet and peaceful, while the BLS express trains roll quickly by. We rejoin the BLS and continue through the breathtaking Swiss countryside. The next stop on the rails from Interlaken to Zermatt is at Kandersteg. There are no roads heading south from Kandersteg. The only way to cross the mountain range is on the BLS rail lines, through the Lochberg Tunnel. This route is so busy that in summer, one train passes either north or south every 10 minutes. Kandersteg itself sits in a flat valley surrounded by mountains. This resort village is also known for its breed of cattle and for the wildflowers and fern that grow here. It's been a mountaineering center for over a century. And in a moment, we'll visit the town of Zermatt, where cars are banned, and our final destination, the mighty Matterhorn, when Railway Adventures continues. Since there are no roads heading south from Kandersteg, the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon Railway developed a way to transport automobiles. These transporter wagons carry cars through the 9-mile-long Lochberg Tunnel. Construction of the tunnel began on October 15th in the year 1906. In July of 1913, it was completed. Today, trains roar through the tunnel, while passengers relax in air-conditioned luxury. "9 miles and 12 minutes later, and we're in Goppenstein." This village was developed during the construction of the tunnel. After stopping here at southwest to Brig, the train tracks run along sheer cliffs, over bridges and through tunnels. The Rhone Valley sits below. After a long descent, the train crosses the steel girder bridge over the River Rhone and glides into the station at Brig. Outside the station building at Brig, the bright red trains of the Brig-Visp-Zermatt Railway stand waiting. This rail line, known as the BVZ, has been carrying passengers on to Zermatt since the year 1891. Before heading south to Zermatt, the train heads east to the town of Visp. From Visp, it's a 28-mile trip south to Zermatt. Outside the village of Visp, the valley is at times narrow, but more often it is wide with rolling meadows. After a strenuous climb along a rushing river with surrounding peaks reaching into the beautiful blue sky, the train rounds the curve to the resort town of Zermatt in the shadow of the mighty Matterhorn. There are no cars or motor traffic in Zermatt. Here it's horses, electric carts, or trains. At 5,000 feet above sea level, Zermatt is a calm village at the foot of the Matterhorn. And it's our final stopping point along Switzerland's BLS and BVZ rail lines.
Zermatt is an outstanding example of how we can preserve the environment and efficiently serve a community. We hope you've enjoyed Mainline to the Matterhorn. I'm Bernie Coppell. Join me on the next Railway Adventures Across Europe. On this railway adventure, the Welsh Xanadu, a prize captured from King Edward I, as we travel the coast of Western Wales. Hi, I'm Bernie Coppell. Just up the tracks, the trophy castle of a freedom fighter and breathtaking views of Cardigan Bay. Join me from Festiniog to Aberystwyth on Railway Adventures Across Europe. There's a castle in Wales that symbolizes the Welsh struggle for independence. It stands as a tribute to the spirit of the people and their beautiful countryside. We capture their spirit of freedom and get a glimpse of the soul of Wales on this railway adventure. Our journey covers far more than just the distance between Festiniog and Aberystwyth. The sights we'll see along the way span centuries of time in a land rich in legend and heritage. As we travel the rails, we'll see how 19th century Welshmen tamed the sea to protect their farmlands. Visit the castle captured from King Edward I and get an incredible view from Crickkeith on Cardigan Bay. We'll also visit the subtropical gardens of Sir Clough Williams Ellis. Stay with us for the Festiniog Railway and its famous double Fairley locomotives, the Talachlin Railways, the Constitution Hill Cliff Railway, and the narrow-gauge steam-powered Arahadel Railway. All aboard for Wild, Wild Wales.
Our railway adventure takes us to the small country of Wales. Located on the western side of Great Britain, Wales is the birthplace of the railway preservation movement. It's the home of many unique and interesting restored steam train excursions. Our adventure begins in the Welsh town of Festiniog, located about 200 miles west of London and easily accessible by British Rail. From Festiniog, we'll travel south along the wild and beautiful Welsh coastline to the resort town of Aberystwyth. We'll also join 2 steam train excursions. Along the way, the pristine beaches and historic castles are incomparable. We first travel by British Rail to Blaenau Festiniog. From there, it's on to Porthmadog on the Festiniog Railway. Before traveling down the line, there's time for a look around the town. Blaenau Festiniog is dominated by slate. The barren landscape stands as impressive testimony to the industry of bygone days, when the town was home to thousands of miners who cut the slate by hand from the mountains all around. A glimpse of these former mines can still be found at Cleckwed Slate Caverns, where the miners' tramway takes passengers on a tour of the complex network of tunnels and caverns. Demonstrations of mining techniques and early Victorian mining conditions are recreated in the caverns. For a tour of the mine, special incline railways take passengers 400 feet below the surface. Guides are available to answer questions. Back on the surface, a slate splitter demonstrates how solid rock is split into thin sheets and then cut down to size. The Welsh people struggled against the scenic mountain terrain, then found prosperity in it during the Industrial Revolution. We can see one of the Festiniog Railway's famous double Fairley locomotives as it steams up towards Festiniog. At the Festiniog station, preparations are underway for the 9-mile trip by narrow-gauge steam railway to Porthmadog. In a moment, the seafaring town of Porthmadog and a castle from the year 1230, when railway adventures continues. From Festiniog, we travel 9 miles to Porthmadog. The Festiniog Railway is the best known of all the narrow-gauge railways in Wales and was originally constructed in 1835 to take slate down to the coast. The carefully restored engine is named Mountaineer. Because there is no turntable on this rail line, Mountaineer runs backwards on the way to the coast and forward on the run back. In 1950, the line was closed due to the decline in the slate industry. Later, it was rebuilt and opened to serve the region's new industry, tourism. The approach to Porthmadog begins at the mile-long cob. The cob is a wall of clay and straw built in 1811 to hold back the sea across the Glaslyn estuary. The wall saved thousands of acres of land, now reclaimed and turned into fertile farms. Porthmadog is still a busy tourist and yachting center, but in the past, Porthmadog was more famous for its fast-sailing schooners. Its shipbuilding heyday was in the mid-19th century. Especially well known were the 2- and 3-masted schooners, which carried Welsh slate all over the world. The Maritime Museum still tells the story, but today the ships in the harbor are of a different kind. No matter what the size the boat is, the water and the pace here are gentle and relaxed. The area appeals to landlubbers as well, and it's easy to understand why. From here, a wide panorama is seen behind the Glaslyn River. There are several beautiful and historic towns and villages not far from Porthmadog. Heading west on British Rail, the first side trip is to the bay city of Criccieth. The views from Criccieth on Cardigan Bay reveal the entire northwest coast of Wales. Here a castle stands high above the bay. It was built in 1230 by the Welsh Prince Llewellyn the Great and can be toured from early spring till late fall. Returning to the Festiniog Railway, we take another side trip through Minford to nearby Portmeirion. This fairy tale village sits on the cliffs above the shores of Cardigan Bay. The unique architecture and subtropical gardens were designed by Sir Clo William Ellis between 1925 and 1975. His idea was to develop a beautiful site without ruining the area around it, and at the same time cultivate a general interest in architecture. To help achieve that, he took old buildings from other areas and re-erected them at Portmeirion. The result, what some people call the Welsh Xanadu. The intimate village was inspired by Italy's Portofino and has a distinctly Italian feel. Because of its character and beauty, it's often used as a location in feature films. A castle stands testament to the turbulent history of Wales when Railway Adventures continues. From Portmeirion in Wales, it's south on British Rail to Harlech. In this coastal town, wide beaches are backed by sand dunes that roll into rich farmland. But the historic heart of the town is the castle standing high on the rocks. The castle was built by King Edward I in the 13th century so he could defend his newly won lands. But a Welsh freedom fighter named Owain Glendower captured it in 1404. The castle and the history of this area inspired one of the most well-known traditional Welsh songs called The Men of Harlech. This romantic castle is considered the most picturesque in all of Wales. Leaving Harlech, we continue south along the coast toward Barmouth. The coastal towns of Clonbetter and Dyffryn Ardudai are behind us as we take another detour. Heading up the river Marach to Coedi Brennan, we travel through the forest. Gold mines, waterfalls, bridges, and trails are easily explored by bike. Returning to the coast, our next stop is at the popular holiday town of Barmouth. This resort is tucked under the Cadair Idris Mountains on the waters of Marach Estuary. High above the waterfront, a cluster of 18th and 19th century houses looks down on the long sandy beach. A bridge over the estuary shows the mix of sand, sea, and mountain. From Barmouth, it's south through tiny villages perched high above the cliffs. The next stop is Towan, where we take a side trip and head inland on the Talaclin Railway toward Abergynolwyn. The engine is made up to look like a character from the popular children's television series Thomas the Tank Engine. Like the Festiniog, this railway was originally built to carry slate down to the seaports. In 1951, it was rescued from closure and preserved by railway enthusiasts. The scenery along the line is breathtaking. From the Abergynolwyn station, visitors walk or ride to the Dolgach waterfalls and through the Nant Gwernol forest. Coming up, a medieval Welsh town and a Victorian village when Railway Adventures returns. From the Talyllyn Railway in Wales and the town of Towyn, it's back on British Rail and south to Aberdyfi. This seaside resort has a Victorian feel of charm and tranquility. Cottages nestle above the sea and boats bob gently at their moorings. The beach is the perfect place to spend an afternoon. From Aberdyfi, the train turns inland to Machynlleth, an old market town. The area is steeped in history. In 1404, it was the site of the Parliament of the Freedom Fighters, headed by Owain Glendower. The Parliament House, made from small split stones, still stands. It's a perfect example of late medieval Welsh townhouses. Besides Welsh history, Machynlleth offers modern comfort. Restaurants, hotels, and cafes cater to locals and tourists. From this inland point, it's back to the coast and south to Aberystwyth. Dunes and flat salt marsh mark the way to the coast. The Royal Pier and Seafront Promenade give the town a nostalgic feel. To the north, an electric cliff railway climbs high above the town to Constitution Hill. At the top, views of the town stretch north to reveal all of Cardigan Bay. Aberystwyth is also the starting point for the Rheidol Railway to the Vale, or Valley of Rheidol. The 12-mile adventure by narrow-gauge steam train runs through wooded glens and tumbling waterfalls to Devil's Bridge. According to Welsh legend, the bridge was built by the devil himself. Here, the valley meets the River Minnoch, plunging 400 feet down the Minnoch Falls. It's the area up and inland from here that sparked the growth and prosperity in this part of Wales. The mines of lead, copper, and silver gave birth to the railway, which now carries tourists and locals to the hills and coastline of Western Wales, where our railway adventure across beautiful Wales comes to an end.
We've reached the end of the line on this railway adventure. Wales is the home of railway preservation and a fascinating place to visit. We hope you've enjoyed Wild, Wild Wales. I'm Bernie Coppell. Join me on the next Railway Adventures Across Europe.